This story is titled, My Dad Doesn't Buy Me Food, So I Get a Job at 15, but My Stepmom Demands This. Hey everyone, life feels really tough right now. I'm Mike, 15 years old, and honestly, it feels like I'm just surviving day by day. Let me explain a bit. My parents split up when I was 9, and my dad got custody. At first, I thought this was better. My mom didn't seem too interested in me anyway. But living with my dad wasn't great either. He worked odd hours and was barely around. When he was home, it was like I didn't exist to him. It's not that he was mean, but he didn't really act like a parent. He never asked about school or if I needed anything. It was just silence. The food situation was the hardest part. The fridge was almost always empty, and when it wasn't, it had random things like ketchup or a stale slice of bread. I quickly realized that if I didn't figure out how to feed myself, I'd go hungry. School lunches became my saving grace, but weekends were the worst. I'd search the pantry and find expired cans or maybe an overlooked pack of crackers. Some nights, I just went to bed hungry, hoping I'd fall asleep quickly enough to ignore the growling in my stomach. I even resorted to digging through dumpsters behind restaurants a few times. I know it's gross and humiliating, but when you're starving, you stop caring. At school, I pretended everything was fine. I didn't want anyone's pity. I didn't have many friends, but the ones I did have didn't need to know I was barely scraping by. I kept to myself, focused on staying invisible, and tried to get through each day without my stomach rumbling loud enough for everyone to hear. Eventually, I got tired of living like this and wanted to take control of my life. That's when I decided to find a job. The problem was, I was just 15 with no experience. Who was going to hire me? I applied everywhere: fast food joints, grocery stores, even a shady gas station. Weeks passed, and no one called me back. I started to feel like I'd be stuck in this situation forever. Then, I got lucky. A small convenience store gave me a chance. The job wasn't glamorous. I stocked shelves, ran the register, and cleaned up messes. But it was a job, and I wasn't going to complain. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to buy bread, milk, and maybe a bag of chips if I felt like splurging. That first paycheck felt incredible. It made me feel like I wasn't entirely powerless. I didn't have to rely on my dad to remember I existed or sneak extra food from the school cafeteria. I could take care of myself, at least a little. Balancing work and school turned out to be harder than I expected. After shifts, I'd come home exhausted with no energy left for homework. My grades started slipping, and a few teachers pulled me aside to ask if I was okay. What was I supposed to say? That I had to work just to eat? So I lied. I told them I was tired but would catch up soon. Deep down, I knew I was barely holding on. Every day felt like a struggle to make it to the next meal, the next shift, and the next day. Meanwhile, I started noticing things about my dad that didn't sit right. He always talked about how hard he worked to provide for us, but I never saw where the money went. He'd come home late looking stressed, but the bills kept piling up, and the house felt like it was falling apart. I didn't ask questions. What was the point? I kept telling myself this was temporary. If I could just get through high school, I could move out, find a better job, and leave all of this behind. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. Then, one day, I came home from a shift and saw a stranger in the living room. She was a beautiful woman, dressed fancy, with her nails done and this strange smile on her face. I stood there, confused, trying to figure out what was happening. Turns out, this was Lisa, my dad's new wife. Apparently, while I was working to feed myself, my dad had gotten married without even telling me. I didn't even know he was dating anyone. It felt like this massive life decision had been made, and I wasn't even considered. When I asked him what was going on, he shrugged and said, "It's nothing for you to worry about." Great. Thanks, Dad. Maybe it wasn't my business that he was dating someone, but he could have at least told me she was moving in. Lisa moved in a week later, and everything changed. For the worse. She acted like she owned the place, redecorating and making new rules. Suddenly, my shoes couldn't be by the door. The TV couldn't stay on. And even the way I folded my laundry was wrong. At first, I tried to stay out of her way, hoping things would settle down. But no, she made it clear I didn't belong in my own home. She'd rearrange things and then get mad if I messed them up. Sorry for existing, Lisa. Speaking of food, that became another problem. Lisa cooked meals, but only for herself and my dad. If I wanted to eat, I had to figure it out on my own. And leftovers? Forget it. She'd throw out anything extra before I could get to it. Once, I tried to eat some rice she left on the stove, and she told me, "That's not for you." My dad, of course, didn't do anything about it. He just sat back and let Lisa take over. I started avoiding the kitchen altogether to escape the awkwardness. Most nights, I'd eat something small in my room, bread or maybe ramen if I had it. But Lisa didn't stop at taking over the house. She started interfering in my life too. She criticized how I dressed, how I kept my room, and even how I spent my time. She once told me my clothes made me look sloppy, and that I should try to look decent. I wanted to tell her to mind her own business, but what was the point? Things hit a new low when she found out I had a job. I guess she noticed me coming home late or saw my uniform in the laundry. Instead of being impressed that I was handling things on my own, she got mad. She cornered me one evening and demanded to know why I hadn't told her I was working. I tried to explain it wasn't her concern, but she didn't care. "If you're earning money, you need to contribute to this household," she said. I told her I barely made enough for food and school supplies, but she didn't care. "That's not my problem," she said. From then on, she insisted I give her half my paycheck, or pay rent. Rent, to live in a house where I wasn't even allowed to eat the food. I couldn't believe it. I tried talking to my dad, hoping he'd support me, but he just agreed with Lisa, saying it was time I learned responsibility. I'm so angry right now. What should I do? Should I give her half my paycheck? I barely make enough to survive as it is. Please, I need advice. Update. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to let you know I gave in and handed over half my paycheck. I didn't know what else to do. The pressure was unbearable, and honestly, I was afraid Lisa would convince my dad to kick me out if I refused. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Once I started giving her half my earnings, you'd think she'd back off. Instead, it made her worse. Every payday, she was there, waiting for her share. I'd barely walk through the door before she'd hold out her hand like a debt collector. "You know the rules," she'd say smugly, like I'd signed some agreement. Half my pay was gone before I even had a chance to think about what I needed. With what was left, I'd scrape by. Bread, ramen, maybe some cheap fruit. Anything extra was out of the question. Every dollar was stretched thin, but it never seemed like enough. And it didn't stop there. She didn't just take my money. Lisa kept piling on more tasks for me to handle. It wasn't just about tidying up after myself anymore. I was now responsible for cleaning the entire house, scrubbing the bathroom, vacuuming the living room, washing all the dishes. It was all on me. And, of course, nothing I did was ever good enough. She'd follow me around after I finished, pointing out random spots I missed or claiming I hadn't put in enough effort. At this point, I was barely getting any sleep. Between school, work, and all the extra chores, I felt like a walking zombie. I'd come home from my shift completely exhausted, only to find a mountain of dirty dishes waiting for me. If I dared to leave them for the next day, Lisa would go off. She'd bang on my door, yelling about how ungrateful and disrespectful I was. It wasn't just the chores either. Lisa had this habit of going through my belongings when I wasn't home. I'd return from work and find my backpack unzipped or my drawers rifled through. At first, I thought I might be imagining things, but then I started noticing items missing. Small amounts of money, snacks I'd bought for myself, even personal things like my notebook would disappear. When I confronted her, she'd put on this fake, innocent act. "Oh, I was just tidying up," she'd say with that phony smile. Tidying up? Really? Taking my money and food was her idea of cleaning? The worst part was how she justified it. "You live under this roof, so you should be contributing more," she'd tell me. But I was already doing everything, paying half my paycheck, doing all the housework, and taking care of myself. What exactly were Lisa and my dad contributing? Even school became impossible to focus on. I'd sit in class barely able to keep my eyes open, and teachers would ask if I was okay. What was I supposed to say? That I was basically a full-time housekeeper with a part-time job who had to pay rent to my dad's wife. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to my friends about it. They didn't know anything, and I didn't want to explain. Most of them came from normal families with parents who actually cared. They'd never understand what it felt like to live this way. Around this time, I began to notice something else. While I was barely scraping by, Lisa and my dad seemed to be doing just fine. New clothes, fancy takeout, shopping bags. Lisa was coming home with something new almost every week. I couldn't help but wonder where all that money was coming from. My dad wasn't exactly earning a fortune, and Lisa didn't have a job. It ate at me. How could they afford all this while I was giving up half my paycheck and still going hungry? All I could do was take things one day and one paycheck at a time. But deep down, I knew this couldn't last. Something had to change eventually. I just didn't know when or how. Maybe Lisa would finally stop tormenting me, or maybe my dad would realize what was happening and step up. I had no idea. I only knew I was beyond tired of all of it. "Hey, it's Mike again. You won't believe what's happened in the past few days. You know how everything eventually builds up to a breaking point? For me, that moment came one Thursday after work. I got home completely drained, as usual, and went straight to my room to drop off my stuff. I planned to grab something to eat, whatever I could find, and go to bed early. But when I opened my backpack, something felt wrong. I always kept my tip money in a small envelope tucked into a side pocket. It wasn't much, but I'd been saving it for weeks to buy new shoes for school. My current pair had holes in them, and with the rainy season coming, I was sick of walking around with wet socks. But when I reached for the envelope, it was gone. At first, I thought I might have misplaced it. I emptied my entire bag, checking every notebook and pocket. But it wasn't there. My stomach dropped. There was only one explanation. Lisa had gone through my bag again. The realization hit me like a wave. That money wasn't just cash. It was hours of work. Hours spent on my feet dealing with cranky customers over trivial price differences. It was mine, and now it was gone. Furious, I stormed out of my room and into the living room. Lisa was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. My dad sat next to her, half watching TV, completely oblivious. "Where the hell is my money?" I demanded, my voice loud enough to make Lisa jump. She quickly recovered, though, acting casual as she continued scrolling. "What money?" she asked, not even bothering to look at me. "The tips from my bag," I said, my voice rising. "I know you took it. It was there this morning, and now it's gone." She finally glanced up at me, her expression completely unfazed. "Oh, that? I used it for groceries," she said. "You live here, don't you? It's only fair you help out." "Fair!" I shouted, my fists clenched. "Are you kidding me? I already give you half my paycheck every week. I do all the housework, and now you're stealing from me? You didn't even ask." Lisa tried to brush it off, putting on her fake, innocent face. "Don't be so dramatic, Mike. It's just money. You'll earn more." "That wasn't for you," I snapped. "That money was for shoes. I've been saving for weeks because mine are falling apart, and you just—" "Don't raise your voice at me, kid," she interrupted sharply. "You live under our roof, eat our food, and use our electricity. If anything, you should be giving us more." I turned to my dad, desperate. "You're okay with this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She's stealing from me and you're just letting it happen?" He barely glanced up from the TV, his face emotionless. "Lisa's right. We're all contributing here. You need to stop acting like a spoiled brat." That was the moment it hit me. I was completely alone in this house. It didn't matter how much I gave, how hard I worked, or how much I sacrificed. To them, I wasn't family. I wasn't even a person. I was just a resource they could use to make their lives easier. My chest felt tight, and my throat burned. But I refused to let them see me break. I marched back to my room and slammed the door. Sitting on my bed, my fists clenched in anger, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. But where could I go? Who could I turn to? I felt trapped, furious, and completely alone. Without thinking, I picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad, trembling as I debated whether to go through with it. A number I hadn't used in years came to mind, one I thought I'd forgotten. My mom. I hadn't spoken to her since I was 10. The last time we talked, she called to wish me a happy birthday, but it had been awkward and short. After that, there were no visits, no calls, not even a text. I hated the idea of calling her, but I had no other choice. The phone rang twice before she answered. Her voice, one I hadn't heard in years, said, "Hello?" For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to say. Finally, I managed, "It's me, Mike." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Mike, is everything okay?" Hearing genuine concern in someone's voice for the first time in years broke something in me. Before I knew it, everything started pouring out. The neglect, the stolen money, the endless chores, the feeling of being unwanted. I told her how Lisa treated me, how my dad allowed it, and how they'd taken my savings. By the time I finished, I was shaking. I worried I'd said too much, or that she'd think I was overreacting. But when she spoke, her voice wasn't calm. It was angry. "He's been taking child support this whole time," she said. I blinked. "What?" "I've been sending him money every month since the divorce," she explained. "It was supposed to be for you, for food, clothes, school supplies, and he's been keeping it." I was stunned. All those years of struggling, going hungry, and wearing worn-out clothes. It didn't have to be that way. He had the money. He just chose not to spend it on me. After a moment, she said, "I'll figure something out. You can't stay there. I'll talk to someone, maybe get a lawyer involved. But you need to hang on a little longer while I sort this out." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her it wasn't as simple as she thought, that everything was too far gone. But hearing her say she'd genuinely try to help caused something inside me to loosen. For the first time, it felt like there might actually be a way out. I took a deep breath and said, "Okay." When the call ended, my thoughts kept spinning. It wasn't a solution yet, but it was more than I'd had in years. I wasn't completely alone anymore. Someone finally knew what I was enduring, apart from you all, and planned to do something about it. Still, I couldn't stop questioning why my mom, who hadn't cared for me in so long, was stepping in now. When I called her, I half expected her to hang up as soon as she heard my voice. "What do you think? Why is she helping now?" Hey everyone, I wanted to share how everything started turning around. Remember when I said I wasn't sure how to feel after my mom offered to help? While it felt nice hearing her promise to do something, I couldn't shake the doubt. Did she actually care about me? Or was she just angry about the money she'd been sending for years? I mean, she hadn't been around before, so was this about me, or did she just feel cheated? Turns out, it was probably more about the money. She had no clue my dad had been pocketing her payments and doing whatever he wanted with them. I'll never forget her reaction during that phone call when I explained I'd been working just to survive. She was furious, not because of what I had gone through, but because she'd been sending money all those years without seeing where it went. "He's been stealing from both of us," she snapped. After the call, I tried not to get my hopes up. I didn't want to rely on her completely. Not yet. What if she changed her mind or got too busy to follow through? Still, I couldn't ignore the possibility that this might finally be my way out. Meanwhile, things at home got even worse. Lisa must have sensed I was distancing myself because she ramped up her behavior. More chores, nastier comments, and more invasions of my privacy. She even started tossing out food I bought, saying it was cluttering her kitchen. But then my mom surprised me. Whatever her reasons, she didn't waste any time. She hired a lawyer right away, and before I knew it, my dad was served with legal papers. Watching him lose it was oddly satisfying. Let me explain how everything unfolded. Before the case went to court, my mom told me we needed solid evidence to support my claims. My story alone wouldn't cut it. So I started paying closer attention to everything going on at home. First, I tracked where my dad was spending his time. He always said he worked long hours to provide for us, but it never added up. He'd leave late, come home whenever he felt like it, and didn't seem remotely stressed about money. One day, I overheard him laughing on the phone, saying he finally had some time off. That's when it hit me. He wasn't working full-time anymore. I began searching through his things whenever he wasn't home, hoping to find proof. It didn't take long. In his desk drawer, I found a resignation letter dated months ago. He had quit his job, but never told anyone. He'd been lying to both my mom and me, pretending he was working to justify keeping the child support. But that wasn't all. I also discovered receipts for fancy dinners, shopping sprees, and even a weekend trip Lisa had taken. It was obvious where the money was going, straight into funding their comfortable lifestyle while I was left paying rent and eating scraps. I took pictures of everything, the resignation letter, receipts, emails, and saved them all on my phone. I felt like a detective building a case. When the court date finally arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I'd never been in a courtroom before, and the idea of airing my life in front of everyone made me sick. But I knew I had to do it. My mom and her lawyer wasted no time laying everything out. The years of child support payments, the proof my dad had quit his job, and the receipts showing how the money was spent. At first, my dad didn't even try to defend himself. He sat there looking stunned, like a deer in headlights. But when the judge started asking questions, he tried to spin it, claiming he'd used the money to keep a roof over my head and support the household. The judge didn't buy it, especially after my mom's lawyer pointed out that I was paying rent and buying my own food. When it was my turn to speak, my hands were trembling as I stood. I took a deep breath and told them everything. How I'd been working to survive, how Lisa made me hand over half my paycheck, and how I did all the chores while they lived comfortably. I described the nights I went to bed hungry and the mornings I skipped breakfast because there was nothing to eat. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd been holding my breath the entire time. I glanced at my dad, hoping for some sign of remorse, but he just looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I'd had the courage to say it all out loud. Lisa didn't even bother showing up. The judge listened carefully and asked a few questions before I showed him the photos I'd taken. My mom's lawyer handed over copies of everything, and the judge's expression grew more serious with each document he reviewed. When the judge finally ruled, the look on my dad's face was unforgettable. My mom was granted custody, and my dad was ordered to repay all the child support he'd taken. Moving forward, he had to send payments directly to my mom. The judge also warned him that if he pulled anything like this again, the consequences would be severe. My dad didn't say a word. He just stared at the table like he wished it would swallow him whole. Walking out of the courtroom felt surreal. For the first time, someone had stood up for me. My mom, despite our rocky history, had come through. Whether she did it because she cared about me or because she hated being taken advantage of didn't matter. Justice had been served. It wasn't exactly a happy ending, though. My mom wasn't thrilled about taking on a parenting role, but she agreed to let me live with her as long as I kept working and looking after myself. She gave me a place to stay, and honestly, that was better than being stuck with Lisa and my dad. We weren't suddenly a warm, loving family, but it was a step up. But she made sure I had food and clean clothes, which was more than I'd had before. I kept my part-time job, even though she told me I didn't need to. I couldn't imagine not working. I'd become too used to depending on myself. Plus, having my own money felt good. It gave me a sense of independence I wasn't ready to give up.